There is a moment in certain places on Earth when the wind stops, the dust settles, and you can feel it. A silence that isn't empty, a silence that is listening back. Beneath the sand of southeastern Turkey, that silence lasted 11,000 years. Beneath the jungle canopy of Cambodia, it lasted 600. Beneath the plains of Zimbabwe, the waters of the Aegean, the deserts of Peru, the dry riverbeds of Pakistan, the silence waited patiently for someone to dig deep enough to disturb it. What they found, again and again, was the same uncomfortable question, a question that has quietly unsettled archaeologists for over a century. What if the story we tell about human progress, the neat, upward staircase from cave to hut to city to skyscraper, isn't quite right? What if, scattered across the ancient world, there were civilizations that reached extraordinary heights of engineering, astronomy, urban planning, and craftsmanship, only to vanish so completely that we are still piecing together who they even were? This is not a story about aliens. It is not a story about lost superpowers or magic. It's something stranger and in many ways more humbling, a story about how easily human brilliance can be forgotten. About the ordinary people, working with nothing but stone tools, ropes, fire, and an astonishing understanding of the world around them, who built things researchers are still struggling to fully explain. 7 civilizations, 7 puzzles. Let's start with the one that broke the rules of history books before archaeologists even finished excavating it. In 1994, a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt was investigating a low, unremarkable hill in southeastern Turkey called Göbekli Tepe, Potbelly Hill in Turkish. Local farmers had been plowing around strange limestone slabs poking out of the earth for decades, assuming they were remnants of a medieval cemetery. Schmidt suspected something older. He had no idea just how old. What his team uncovered would eventually force textbooks to be rewritten. Massive T-shaped limestone pillars, some weighing over 10 tons, arranged in circular enclosures, carved with intricate reliefs of foxes, boars, scorpions, and vultures. Radiocarbon dating placed the site at roughly 9600 BCE. To put that in perspective, Göbekli Tepe is older than Stonehenge by about 6,000 years. It predates the invention of pottery. It predates the wheel. According to archaeological evidence, it was built before humans in the region had even domesticated wheat. And that's what made it so disruptive. The prevailing theory for decades had been simple. Agriculture came first, and only once humans settled down to farm did they have the surplus time and organization to build monumental architecture and religious structures. Göbekli Tepe seemed to flip that order upside down. Researchers believe hunter-gatherer communities, people who had no permanent homes, no crops, no domesticated animals, somehow organized themselves well enough to quarry, transport, carve, and erect stone pillars taller than a grown man, decades before anyone in the region planted the first seed of wheat. How does a mobile, foraging society coordinate labor on that scale? Some historians suggest the site functioned as a ceremonial gathering point, where scattered bands converged seasonally for feasting and ritual, and that the sheer act of building something so enormous may have been the very thing that pushed early humans towards settled life, not the other way around. If that interpretation holds, agriculture wasn't the cause of civilization. It might have been the consequence. The site was also deliberately buried around 8,000 years ago, filled in with rubble and sediment by the very people who used it. Nobody knows exactly why. Some archaeologists propose it was a ritual decommissioning, a symbolic closing of a sacred chapter. Others believe it may simply reflect a shift in beliefs, a new generation abandoning the customs of the old. The evidence remains debated, but the burial is precisely what preserved it so well for us to find, 11,000 years later. Less than a decade's drive to the east, and thousands of years later, another civilization was quietly assembling something almost as astonishing, and doing it with a level of precision that still puzzles engineers today. Long before Rome had sewers, before Athens had its aqueducts, the cities of the Indus Valley Civilization were already solving urban problems that many modern cities still struggle with. Stretching across what is now Pakistan and northwest India, at its height around 2500 BCE, this civilization covered an area larger than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia combined. And yet, for most people, it remains the least talked about of the great Bronze Age cultures. At the city of Mohenjo-Daro, archaeologists uncovered something remarkable: a fully integrated urban drainage system. Nearly every house, even modest ones, had access to private wells and bathrooms connected to a network of covered brick drains running beneath the streets. Wastewater didn't just pool in the open, breeding disease, the way it did in many ancient and even some medieval cities. It was channeled away, systematically, through a grid of interlocking sewers. According to archaeological evidence, this level of sanitation planning wasn't matched in most of the world for well over 3,000 years. The bricks themselves tell their own quiet story of coordination. Across Indus Valley sites separated by hundreds of kilometers, the fired bricks used in construction follow an almost identical ratio, 4:2:1, length to width to height. That kind of standardization doesn't happen by accident. It suggests some form of shared measurement system, possibly even centralized oversight, spanning an enormous cultural and geographic footprint, without a single palace, a single named king, or a single monumental temple ever being identified. That absence is, in some ways, the most haunting part of the Indus Valley story. Unlike Egypt with its pharaohs or Mesopotamia with its god-kings, we don't know who ruled these cities, or if anyone ruled them at all in the way we'd expect. Some historians suggest a more decentralized, perhaps even cooperative form of governance. Others argue we simply haven't found the right evidence yet, and that a ruling elite existed but left behind symbols we don't yet know how to read. And that's the other great mystery. The Indus script, thousands of short inscriptions on seals, pottery, and tablets, remains undeciphered to this day. We can see the language, we just can't hear it. Researchers have proposed dozens of decipherment theories over the last century, none conclusively proven. Whatever these people were trying to say to us, across 4,500 years, is still locked behind a door nobody has found the key to. By around 1900 BCE, the great cities of the Indus began to empty out. Climate shifts, changing river courses, and possibly the drying up of the Ghaggar-Hakra river system are the leading explanations offered by current research, rather than any single catastrophic collapse. It wasn't an ending with fire and conquest. It was quieter than that, a slow, spreading silence, as one of the most sophisticated urban societies of the ancient world gradually faded from human memory, so thoroughly that it wasn't even rediscovered until the 1920s. If precision engineering feels almost like a modern invention, the next civilization on this list will make you question that entirely. Because, in the deserts of Egypt, a level of architectural precision was achieved that some modern construction crews, with all our steel and lasers, would find genuinely difficult to replicate. The Great Pyramid of Giza needs no introduction, but its numbers deserve a second look, because they rarely get the attention they should. Built during the reign of Pharaoh Khufu around 2560 BCE, the pyramid originally rose to 481 feet, making it the tallest man-made structure on Earth for nearly 4,000 years. A record unbroken until the construction of Lincoln Cathedral in the 14th century. What's genuinely staggering isn't just its size, it's its accuracy. The base of the Great Pyramid is level to within just a couple of centimeters across its entire 13-acre footprint. Its four sides are oriented to true north with a margin of error of roughly 3/60ths of a degree, more precise than many modern buildings achieve with GPS and laser leveling. According to archaeological evidence, the ancient Egyptians likely used careful astronomical observation, tracking the rising and setting points of stars, to calibrate that orientation with such extraordinary accuracy. For decades, popular imagination insisted the pyramids must have been built by slaves, whipped into forced labor under a brutal god-king. But excavations of workers' villages near Giza in the 1990s changed that picture significantly. Archaeologists uncovered bakeries capable of producing enormous quantities of bread, breweries, medical facilities showing evidence of bone setting and even surgery, and cemeteries where laborers were buried with respect, close to the sacred monument itself, a burial placement typically reserved for people of some standing. Current research now suggests that at least a significant portion of the workforce consisted of skilled, paid laborers, organized into work gangs with names like Friends of Khufu, rotating through in shifts, fed a diet substantial enough to sustain the grueling physical work. The engineering questions, though, remain genuinely open. Estimates suggest 2.3 million limestone blocks make up the Great Pyramid, some weighing as much as 9 tons, with the largest granite blocks in the internal chambers weighing up to 80 tons, quarried from Aswan, over 500 miles away. Exactly how these blocks were transported, lifted, and placed with such precision is still debated among Egyptologists. Ramps are the leading theory: straight ramps, spiraling ramps, internal ramps, but no definitive physical evidence of the specific ramp system used has ever been found intact. Some historians suggest a combination of methods evolved as construction progressed higher. The evidence remains incomplete, and honestly, that incompleteness is part of what keeps people fascinated. What's not in question is the sophistication behind it. This wasn't brute force. It was mathematics, astronomy, logistics, and labor management operating in concert, at a scale that wouldn't be attempted again for millennia. And Egypt, remarkably, is only the most famous entry on this list. Halfway around the world, in the high-altitude deserts of Peru, another culture was leaving its own message, one so large it can only be fully understood from the sky. The Nazca Lines stretch across nearly 200 square miles of arid plateau in southern Peru, etched into the earth sometime between 500 BCE and 500 CE. There are more than 800 straight lines, 300 geometric shapes, and around 70 biomorphic figures. A hummingbird with a 30-foot wingspan, a monkey with a spiraled tail, a spider, a condor stretching nearly the length of 2 football fields. Here's what makes them extraordinary. The Nazca people who created them had no aircraft, no hot air balloons, and as far as we know, no way to view their own work from above. And yet the proportions are so consistent, so carefully scaled, that researchers believe the artists worked from small preparatory drawings, then used simple surveying techniques, stakes, cords, and careful packing, to enlarge those designs across the desert floor with remarkable geometric accuracy. For decades, the Nazca Lines attracted no shortage of sensational claims: runways for ancient astronauts, landing strips for otherworldly visitors. These theories make for entertaining television, but they don't hold up against the archaeological evidence, and mainstream researchers have firmly moved past them. According to current archaeological consensus, the lines were most likely created for ritual and religious purposes, possibly connected to water worship in one of the driest regions on Earth, or as processional pathways used during ceremonies tied to the agricultural calendar. Some historians propose the animal figures represented constellations or deities associated with rainfall and fertility, an understandable obsession for a civilization surviving in a landscape that receives, on average, less than an inch of rain per year. What's rarely mentioned is how the Nazca preserved something even more impressive than the lines themselves: a sustainable water system. Facing extreme aridity, they engineered underground aqueducts called puquios, spiraling stone channels that tapped into underground water tables and funneled water to the surface. Remarkably, some of these puquios are still functioning today, over 1,500 years later, still irrigating fields in a desert that should, by every logical measure, be unlivable. The lines survived because of a strange accident of geography. The Nazca Desert is one of the driest, most wind-still places on the planet, meaning there's almost nothing to erode markings scratched into the reddish, iron oxide-coated stones, revealing the pale yellow-gray earth beneath. It's an open-air museum preserved not by human effort, but by an environment so harsh that almost nothing could survive there, except, ironically, the artwork of the people who once called it home. From the driest desert on Earth, we travel to one of its most unforgiving jungles, where a civilization built what may be the largest religious monument ever constructed by human hands, and then let the forest swallow it whole. Angkor, the capital of the Khmer Empire in present-day Cambodia, was, at its peak around the 12th and 13th centuries, quite possibly the largest pre-industrial urban settlement on the planet. Recent LIDAR surveys, a laser-based aerial mapping technology that can see through dense forest canopy, revealed something researchers had only suspected for decades. Angkor wasn't just a cluster of famous temples. It was a sprawling metropolis, stretching over 1,000 square kilometers, larger than modern-day Los Angeles, home to what some estimates suggest may have been close to 1 million people at a time when London had perhaps 50,000. At the heart of it all sits Angkor Wat, a temple complex so vast that its outer wall alone stretches over 3.5 kilometers, surrounded by a moat wider than most rivers. Built in the early 12th century under King Suryavarman II, it was originally dedicated to the Hindu god Vishnu before later becoming a Buddhist site. A transformation that itself tells the story of a civilization whose spiritual identity evolved over centuries rather than staying frozen in time. But what the LIDAR scans revealed beneath the jungle canopy in 2012 and the years following was even more staggering than the temples themselves. An immense hydraulic engineering network. Reservoirs, canals, and moats spanning hundreds of kilometers, engineered to capture monsoon rains and redistribute water across the dry season. According to archaeological evidence, this system likely allowed the Khmer to sustain multiple rice harvests per year, feeding a population large enough to build and maintain the temple city for centuries. And yet, this same water mastery may have ultimately contributed to Angkor's undoing. Tree ring analysis from the region has revealed evidence of severe, decades-long droughts interspersed with intense monsoon flooding during the 14th and 15th centuries. Some historians suggest that the very infrastructure that made Angkor thrive, a rigid, centralized network of canals and reservoirs, became a liability once the climate destabilized, unable to flexibly absorb such extreme swings between drought and flood. Combined with shifting trade routes, regional conflict, and the gradual rise of coastal trading ports that didn't rely on Angkor's inland agricultural model, the great city slowly lost its population. By the 1600s, Angkor Wat itself had never been fully abandoned. Buddhist monks maintained it continuously, but the sprawling city around it had been reclaimed by the very jungle it once dominated. When European travelers discovered Angkor Wat in the 19th century, they described it in tones of wonder, often assuming, incorrectly, and with more than a little colonial bias, that such a monument couldn't possibly have been built by the ancestors of the Khmer people living nearby. Modern archaeology has thoroughly corrected that record. Angkor stands today as one of the clearest reminders that the label jungle civilization should never be mistaken for primitive civilization. Extraordinary hydraulic engineering, sprawling urban planning, and religious architecture on an almost unimaginable scale, all achieved centuries before modern surveying tools existed to even properly measure it. Now travel south, across the equator into the grasslands of southern Africa, where another empire built in stone was, for generations, the target of one of history's most telling and most thoroughly debunked controversies. Great Zimbabwe rises out of the plateau of southeastern Zimbabwe, a sprawling complex of dry stone architecture built without a single drop of mortar. Its most iconic structure, the Great Enclosure, features a curved outer wall over 11 meters high and nearly 250 meters in circumference, constructed from an estimated 1 million granite blocks, precision cut and stacked with such structural skill that sections of it have stood for close to 700 years without collapsing. Built primarily between the 11th and 15th centuries by ancestors of the Shona people, Great Zimbabwe was the capital of a powerful trading kingdom that connected the African interior to a vast Indian Ocean trade network. Archaeological excavations have uncovered Chinese porcelain, Persian pottery, and glass beads from as far away as India, evidence of a sophisticated economy built on gold and ivory exports, flowing outward through Swahili coast trading cities and into markets thousands of miles away. Here's where the story turns uncomfortable. When European colonizers and prospectors encountered the ruins in the late 19th century, many flatly refused to believe that African builders had constructed it. Colonial-era writers spun elaborate theories crediting Phoenicians, Arabs, or even the biblical Queen of Sheba, actively erasing the accomplishments of the very people whose ancestors had built it. This wasn't a fringe theory. It was, for a time, the dominant colonial narrative, one that conveniently supported the political interests of European settlers looking to justify their presence in the region. Serious archaeological work throughout the 20th century, including detailed excavations and radiocarbon dating, thoroughly and repeatedly confirmed what should never have needed confirming. Great Zimbabwe was built by indigenous African communities, using local materials, local labor, and construction techniques developed and refined over generations within the region itself. Today, this stands as settled archaeological consensus, and the site's history serves as a stark case study in how political bias can distort and delay our understanding of the past. The kingdom's decline, around the 15th century, is generally attributed by current research to a combination of factors: possible overpopulation straining local resources, soil exhaustion, dwindling gold supplies, and shifting trade routes that favored other emerging regional powers. It wasn't erased by war or conquest. It simply gradually lost its economic gravity, and its population dispersed, leaving behind those extraordinary stone walls as the primary reminder that one of Africa's greatest medieval kingdoms had ever existed at all. For our final civilization, we leave land altogether and descend into the cold, dark waters off a small Greek island, where sponge divers in 1901 pulled up something that would take nearly a century, and the invention of X-ray imaging, to even begin to understand. The wreck lay off the coast of Antikythera, a Greek island in the Aegean Sea, dated to somewhere around 70 to 60 BCE. Among the recovered treasures, bronze statues, glassware, jewelry, was a corroded, unassuming lump of bronze and wood that sat largely ignored in a museum drawer for decades. It wasn't until 1902 that archaeologist Valerio Stais noticed a gear embedded in the fragment, and even then, most historians simply couldn't accept what it implied. Sophisticated geared machinery in ancient Greece, it seemed almost impossible. Modern imaging technology eventually proved them wrong. Using X-ray computed tomography in the early 2000s, researchers were able to peer inside the corroded fragments without damaging them, revealing an astonishingly complex assembly of at least 30 interlocking bronze gears, some with teeth just over a millimeter apart. According to archaeological evidence and subsequent research, this device, now known as the Antikythera Mechanism, functioned as an analog astronomical calculator, capable of predicting the positions of the sun and moon, forecasting lunar and solar eclipses, and even tracking the 4-year cycle of the ancient Olympic Games. Researchers believe it may have also modeled the movements of the 5 planets visible to the naked eye, based on gear ratios reconstructed from the surviving fragments. Though because roughly 2/3 of the mechanism was never recovered, some elements of its full function remain, quite genuinely, theoretical. What's not in dispute is the sophistication of the concept itself. A mechanical, geared computer for modeling the heavens, built more than 2,000 years before the mechanical clocks of medieval Europe, which most historians long considered the starting point for this kind of engineering entirely. The implications rippled outward. If the ancient Greeks possessed the technical knowledge to design and manufacture something this intricate, what else did they build that simply didn't survive 2,000 years underwater or on land? Ancient texts occasionally reference automated devices and geared instruments described by figures like Cicero and Archimedes, references historians had often treated as exaggeration or myth. The Antikythera Mechanism forced a reconsideration. Perhaps these weren't exaggerations at all. Perhaps they were simply describing technology that, until 1901, no one believed could have existed. 7 civilizations. 7 very different landscapes: a windswept hill in Turkey, a river valley in Pakistan, a desert plateau in Egypt, a parched coastline in Peru, a flooded jungle in Cambodia, a granite plateau in Zimbabwe, and a shipwreck at the bottom of the Aegean. And yet a single thread runs through all of them. Each of these societies achieved a level of precision, coordination, and understanding of their environment that we are still, in some cases, working to fully comprehend. None of this requires lost technology, ancient visitors, or hidden conspiracies to be extraordinary. If anything, the far more remarkable truth is the simpler one, that human beings, using nothing but observation, cooperation, trial, error, and generations of accumulated knowledge, were capable of achievements that still challenge our assumptions today. The mystery isn't that these civilizations were somehow impossible. The mystery is how much of their knowledge, their methods, and their voices were lost to time, and how much of what we call ancient history is really just the small fraction that happened to survive. Every one of these sites still holds open questions: undeciphered scripts, missing construction records, fragments of machines we can only partially reconstruct. Archaeologists continue to dig, to scan, to debate, and every few years, it seems, the story gets rewritten again, just as it was in 1994 on a quiet hill in Turkey. So here's the question worth sitting with. If a laser scan hidden beneath a jungle canopy, or a corroded lump of bronze pulled from a shipwreck, can quietly rewrite what we thought we knew about the ancient world, what else might still be buried out there, waiting? And which of these 7 civilizations do you think deserves far more recognition than it currently gets? Let us know in the comments.